Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you doing?
Doing fine, thank
Good,
you.
Good.
Ready to get to work.
Get to work. That's right.
I wished I could say, we are so important, we are going to change the world. You know, I'm not naive to say that, but I don't know, some people think I'm naive when I say the philosophy that we talk about could change the world. Ideas do have effect, and that's why we keep going, even with the realization of my limited abilities, and as long as we recognize that. But truth is a powerful weapon, and if we give a sincere effort to seeking out the truth, I think we can accomplish something. But today, we want to talk about Australia. It seems like we've been talking about them a lot.
Yeah.
And of course, complaining a lot too, but there's been some resistance there. People who in Australia stand up there. So they're not completely lost yet. Matter of fact, sometimes when I look at what they're doing, I wish we'd have more of that here, you know, when they're standing up and resisting. But there's a headline that caught our attention today from the dossier. And it says, the apartheid state, Australia to impose lockdown on unvaccinated citizens. Oh, they're bad people, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't do what the government told them, even if it's dangerous. You know, you just do it because your safety comes, you know, in doing what the government says. And so, yeah, I don't think it's unfair to use the word apartheid because they want to just seek out this group of people because of the crimes they committed. That is, they wanted to think for themselves and they wanted to have an opinion, and they had the audacity to act like they live in a free society where individuals make decisions, and they had the audacity to think that there was still this principle of doctor-patient relationship, and that the doctor doesn't mean Dr. Fauci. You know, it's your personal physician, and the patient themselves are the ones who make these decisions. But anyway, this is what they're preparing, and we're hoping that people will wake up and say, this doesn't make any sense. And of course, their rationale about why the greatest danger comes from the unvaccinated. It's been so well thoroughly examined already, even by the CDC leaks it out because it's there. You know, that the unvaccinated is not necessarily a threat to anybody. Of course, you know, if they're the argument that, you know, convinces a lot of people, well, you know what? If the vaccinations work, what do you have to go through all this for? Why create this havoc? Why create an apartheid state over something that they don't have any evidence to show that you know, that there's harm done by the people who don't get vaccinated? And quite frankly, the more evidence that I look at, the more evidence I see that people should be paying attention to the pros and cons to help them make their decision, because there certainly has been, you know, some complications from the vaccines, and there are complications that they come from the booster shot. But they wouldn't say, well, we never said there would never be any complication. Matter of fact, the people who are very favorable toward the vaccines will say, oh yeah, they can be, but statistically, they can manipulate statistics to make them say different things. And of course, if you can get a reliable statistician, you might decide, well, maybe it isn't always cracked up to be on what Fauci is promoting.
Yeah, you mentioned the word choice, and that's the essential thing that we promote here, is the choice, not pro or anti. And as you say, if you take it and you think it works, then you should be comfortable. But if, you know, our position has always been, if you lose the right to make critical health decisions for yourself and your family, then you've lost everything. And that's what we're fighting for, is the right for decision. On the issue, on the word apartheid, it is absolutely accurate because the word means separation. And that's what the Australian government is doing. They've announced that on October 11th, New South Wales, which is the most populous state in Australia, will divide people up and segregate them between those who have taken the shot and those who have not taken the shot. The people who have taken the shot can have a little bit of their freedoms back, and there's a list little bit of their freedoms back. The people that don't are literally under house arrest. They cannot do anything, and they said it's, quote, indefinite. So indefinitely locked in your house. So they've kept the Australians already locked up months and months and months, year and a half, and now they're going to open the door a little bit if you do what they say, and it's causing problems. And we've talked a lot about Australia and the fact that people are pushing back against this. We're seeing more and more of it. But the fact is, and we're going to show some scenes later, but the fact is, Dr. Paul, if any other country on earth was beating its citizens and shooting its citizens like the Australian government is doing, we would A, have sanctions immediately, and I would say B, it would be a Saddam Hussein type of invasion going on. But somehow they get away with it. Let's do a couple of clips because we want to show people, we want to give due credit to Jordan Schachtel, and this is his piece. He writes it in his Substack, the dossier, and so that's worth looking. Here's the next clip if we can. This is from that. He put a tweet in there, and here's the Deputy Premier John Barilaro. He says the message to the unvaccinated is you will not achieve any further freedom unless you get vaccinated. What a thug. What an absolute and utter thug. And they're awful, evil people. And let's see a little bit, let's watch a minute of this clip. And it's a long clip, we don't want to play the whole thing, but this just gives a taste of literally the hell on earth that is Australia right now. If we can have that video clip and just play, I think I noted how much we want to play of it. Go ahead.
For our help in Melbourne live now.
I know children raising a father, 13-year-old.
Injured by the unprovoked police violence on Melbourne street.
Third world barbarianism.
Isn't it amazing how there can be a conversion of probably very decent living people that's been probably doing some decency and in managing, problems that they have, and all of a sudden turned it into the mob themselves.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about the apartheid. That's an imprisonment, and I think that has something to do with discrimination. It sounds discriminatory to what they're doing, and also when you take away a person's freedom, and they actually admit that if you don't behave, you're going to lose your freedom with due process of law. What about the due process that was began many years ago, like in 1512, trying to tell people you have to be charged with a crime before you can take away their freedoms. In this case, what is the freedom? They have decided that they wanted to bear the risk of their medical care by themselves without a bureaucrat coming and telling them. And so there's a lot of violations here and a lot of cancellation of rights that took hundreds of years to establish.
Yeah.
But it seems like it takes a long, long time to establish some of these principles. At the same time, the conversion of a group of people who seem to be upright citizens all at once are turned around and beating the living daylights out of their citizens because they said, well, I think it's my choice on what kind of medicine I take.
Yeah. It's terrible, and we collected a few headlines on this. I think they're from Reuters, most of them are. Let's look at it really quickly, this next photo. This is from Reuters. Sydney's unvaccinated warned of social isolation. Quote, officials warn unvaccinated face, quote, difficult life indefinitely. The numbers are climbing even after the lockdowns. Let's look at the next one. This is Melbourne. I think it's also from Reuters. This is people should scratch their heads. Melbourne cases hit record despite 2 months of lockdowns. Normal people would say, gosh, maybe this isn't working. Maybe there's something wrong with lockdowns. Maybe they're not all they were cracked up to be, as the rest of the world has for the most part understood. But of course, they don't want to do that. They want to blame the evil people. So just leave that there for 1 second. They say they're blaming home parties to watch sporting events. That's behind everything. It's people having a couple friends over to watch sporting events. But that's also pretty suspicious too, because we've been showing pictures here in the US of 100,000 people watching a football game together without a mask. So maybe we don't have the same kind of people as they do. But I want to do one final thing, because buried in this story, if we can look at the next one, this is something critical that, as usual, the mainstream media buries. Authorities have ditched a COVID-0 strategy from that article. And that is the most significant thing, because the entire lockdown regimen was predicated on the idea that we must stamp out COVID completely gone. And that's why it was so totalitarian for them to do this. This is an admission that the strategy absolutely failed, produced nothing, but they're keeping the same mentality, which is totalitarianism, and just simply adopting it to a new strategy, which is take the shot or stay home and get locked in your cellar.
You know, the effort in a parliamentary procedure is such that I've thought about a lot. How am I going to convert some people in Washington to the position of freedom, and especially in the monetary issue? And I knew early on that there were two arguments that you shouldn't bother with. Not when you're dealing with politicians. One is a moral argument. You know, do you think they're going to listen to morality of infringing on liberty? The other one is, of course, in the U.S., it would be the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of been put aside. They care about the Constitution as long as they can rewrite it as they go along.
As they go. So
then there's a couple other ways that people can be convinced that maybe we could get people to come our way. The other thing is, is powerful is the practicality of it. And I think there's a little bit of that working on now, because they keep asking the question about why are the non-vaxxers harmful if if the vaccines work? You know, it's a practical question, even though they haven't come to the proper conclusion.
Yeah.
But then there's one other factor, probably not involved in Australia or any of these other places. Maybe this is just in the United States, that there are lobbyists involved, trying to pass laws where they're going to make more money. And the medical profession is like that. It's been that way for a long time, and it's probably especially bad under today's circumstances. So to argue against the lobbyists and the money, and also the practicality of some of this takes a long time, and it's sad, but I don't think that people should give up on the moral and the constitutional arguments, because ultimately that's the only thing that will count.
Yeah.
But on the short run of being in a short-term debate on the next piece of legislation, and you're trying to convert some legislators, they're not going to pay any attention. But when I was working in Washington, I never thought that my job was to convert the people in Washington.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were salvageable for the most part. But there were people, and there still are, and we reach them. Many of them are, watching our program, and they were very, very interested in a totally different approach. But right now, we're in the midst of this conflict on how you change policy, and it's very frustrating. More and more doctors, we talked about thousands of doctors getting together now, demanding that we follow the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
So it does change, but it changes slowly. But we have to recognize just what is the nature of the enemy.
Yes. Well, we'll close out the segment on Australia with a slight good news story, because we've got to do something, otherwise it's just revolting. Let's look at this next clip. Now, this is a little bit of good news. Australia's corporations rebel against government's draconian COVID lockdowns. Finally, the corporations are waking up, and the leaders, this is from Zero Hedge, this is the The leaders of many of Australia's biggest companies, including BHP, Macquarie, and Qantas, have signed a letter demanding that the government acknowledge it's time to, quote, learn to live with the virus, as many other countries have done, since COVID-0 has finally been exposed as an impossible dream. As we've said literally from the beginning, and this is from the now banned Berenson, virus gonna virus. The countries that recognize that first, like Sweden, Belarus, and a few other countries, they've gone through it certainly no worse, and in many cases better than those that have locked down, certainly better even than Australia.
Yes, and right now the frustration for many of us is how the corporations right now not only are complacent and go along, but they really carry out some of the worst tactics of the government. And I'm thinking right now about censorship, and they are in partnership, and they do this, and the government, the politicians say, oh, we don't want to have any mandates against public speaking. You can say whatever you want, but the corporations can come in, and they seem to be able to get away with this pretense that they're independent-minded and they're practicing the First Amendment by just penalizing anybody that disagrees with the government. So there's a big difference between what a corporation and a business person is like in a free market, because they may be very, very rich, but you don't hate their guts because they're rich and provide a good service for people. But at the same time, if they're in bed with government and they benefit from the problems, when the big one comes, the big economic crisis comes, we can go either way. It can wake up people and they decide freedom is better than slavery and come in our direction. But others may just say that, well, they throw in the towel and they say, well, the people who seem to be thriving. But I tell you what, it'll be a time when those of us who believe in true liberty, we ought to work hard to present our case.
Yeah. Well, let's switch over to the next topic of 3, and let's put up that next clip that will explain what we're going to talk about. This is from Summit News again. Steve Watson does a great job. Republicans warn that the Department of Homeland Security is planning to fire unvaxxed Border Patrol agents. Now, this interests us on a couple of levels, Dr. Paul, but House Judiciary Committee Ranking Member Jim Jordan wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, saying, well, our border is facing a serious crisis. We have learned that you are threatening to terminate a significant portion of the Customs and Border Protection workforce.
Yes, and the one person that presents a case that sounds good on the surface is Soros. We want a free society. We want an open society. It sounds pretty good. And then there's some people who say, well, there should be absolutely no borders. But in a natural sense, in a libertarian society, people are allowed to congregate together, and decide that they have a home together. And that means that they will segregate and they will get along with their friends and neighbors. But that is not permitted under these circumstances. They want to throw that aside and make sure that the government makes all these decisions. And of course, that is where the real tragedy comes.
And I don't know if it's maliciousness or incompetence or some mix of the two, but this is very related to what we've been talking about. We're in the middle of a healthcare crisis with the pandemic and what have you, hospitals overflowing. So what do? Let's fire tens of thousands of nurses. And that's what's happening. We have a crisis on the border. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's an illegal immigration crisis. Whatever your perspective on immigration, it's a crisis on the border. So what's the solution? Fire all the border guards. Fire all the border guards. Get rid of the police. And I don't know what the answer is about this administration, but the incompetence is breathtaking.
Last year, when there was more television coverage of the streets being in total violence, in two ways. Economically, there were the tent cities and the terrible, terrible conditions that they were created. At the same time, the hoodlums took over. And in broad daylight, with police cars sitting there, they could break in windows and just walk past the police and carry away their loot. And they did this, and what was the answer? Well, police brutality. We've done a few programs over the years on the militarization of the police, because very often during their enforcement of the drug war, there was the type of police brutality we would still condemn. But that's not what this is. This is a sort of insanity coming to light. So innocent people are being damaged, their property is being destroyed and stolen, and they're not allowed to own a weapon to defend themselves and their family. So, well, maybe the police will help us. No, we fired them. We got rid of them. That really makes a lot of sense. That's why, the practical argument eventually comes about, on trying to get back to normalcy, is in a practical sense. And you'd think, why don't the people of Venezuela say, maybe the practical answer is, isn't there a better way to use our wealth? We have natural wealth in this country. Yeah. Maybe freedom is the answer. Maybe property rights are the answer, instead of having this distortion and people keep getting poorer and poorer.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our last segment if we're ready, Dr. Paul. And this is something that we've been talking about a lot. It's let's put up the next clip, because this is a problem for the administration. And this is from AP, and they are definitely not necessarily on our side when it comes to health freedom. But it's an important point. Some fear boosters will hurt drive to reach the unvaccinated. And we've talked about the administration has a real problem, because on the one hand, they want to roll these boosters out, but on the other hand, they want to say at the same time, the shots are safe and extremely effective. And those two things are at loggerheads. They can't both be true at the same time, unless you're telling us there's something very different about the booster that wasn't in the original. And so what they're noticing, and this is from the AP article, it's certainly not us saying it, but the number of people now getting vaccinated has plummeted by more than 50% since they first started talking about boosters. And this is from the article. Dr. Jason Goldman, physician in Coral Springs, Florida, said, quote, "Many of my patients are saying, if we need a third dose, what's the point? And it's a problem. I don't know what the answer is for the administration, but it's a real problem, because those two things can't both be true at the same time."
Right, and I think there's more information now just by word of mouth, and that is that they know people have been getting sick from the booster, and there are problems that come from boosters, and it doesn't solve the problem of the already vaccinated. Matter of fact, things seem to get worse for them, and they do now have statistics to show that vaccinated people get it. And if you have natural immunity, you don't get it twice. This sort of thing. But they've been doing this for a long time, and statistics are important. And one thing is how many people are getting problems from the booster. I have a member of my family that had a severe reaction from the second shot, trying to do the same thing, and the job was involved in all of this thing, but that wasn't reported. So there's so many not reported, and then the ones who do finally search this out, the numbers are pretty startling. I'm not going to say this is true, because I don't want to believe it. But there are some information out there about that. But one thing that they have, once again, when they were reporting cases, they could do whatever they want, do a lot of tests that if you search long enough, you can get more cases and more infections going on to prove that the pandemic is way out of control. To prove that there are less complications from getting a shot, nobody's had a vaccination, a boost, and they haven't been vaccinated for 14 days. So if you get your shot, or 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 14 days, they're not counted as related to the vaccination. And this has been reported, and I'd like people, to, if they've heard of things like this, that I think the truth will come out finally on this. I happen to think, since I have personal experience of knowing some people who got very, very sick after, and there's been a lot, even reported in the papers, somebody had a shot and had a heart attack or stroke.
Yeah, I was going to say someone in my family had a real severe reaction to the second shot. He dropped dead. So that's about as severe as you can get. So we'll see. It's a problem they have, and they're not explaining it very well. We don't take a side, but they're not explaining it very well. I was going to kind of end up with a couple things, Dr. Paul. and this is something that I just saw as we were getting ready to go on the show. This is Senator Feinstein. It's probably a good way to end the show because Senator Feinstein would love nothing more than to be just like Australia. She is an authoritarian. The people in her party and many people in the other party are also authoritarians. They want to tell you what to do. Well, she has introduced a bill that would force Americans to take a vaccine or take a test to be able to fly within the United States. First of all, if you just care about business, it'll decimate the air travel industry. If you care about freedom, it'll decimate our freedom. These people will like nothing more than for us to be just like apartheid Australia. My final thing would be to again remind our viewers, we are moving more toward free speech platforms. Our conference from Washington, D.C. is being put up on Odyssey. So if you go to the Odyssey website, search for Ron Paul, we have a playlist. We're putting them up every day or so, a new talk. Today's talk is a fantastic talk from Representative Thomas Massey. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll giggle, and it's a great talk. And anyone who's heard him speak knows what a great speaker he is and what a formidable intellect he is. So go over to Odyssey, search Ron Paul, and you'll be able to watch these. And we have, I think, 5 or 6 more to put up.
Oh. You know, I've always been the first one to admit that I never quite understood how the internet was created and how it works and the mechanics of it. It just hasn't been of interest to me, but I recognized very early on of the potential benefits of spreading of information through the internet, and we've made use of that. We do that now, and hopefully we're communicating at the very moment with a lot of people. And I think that is pretty important, but we also know that we're threatened. Daniel mentioned yesterday that RPI was banned on their Twitter account, and we don't know whether we'll ever be included in that. But I've always said at the beginning, I anticipate, well, there will be problems, technical problems and political problems. And but I believe the people that are involved very early on, and even now, many libertarians like the fascination of how the internet works. And I thought, well, there's a lot of smart people out there. They'll come up with another option, and there is competition for the social media. Of course, when you compare it, there's a big difference, and I think one of the reasons is there's been a lot of assistance passed on to the large companies, because I don't consider them an example of what happens in a free market society. So there's this effort made. It's out there. We know a little bit about it, and we put up our speeches on other websites. And there has to be a way of doing this. I think it's going to develop. Who knows what's going to happen to some of those companies? Sometimes a company just disappear under certain circumstances that nobody could quite understand. But because they are based on some bad assumptions, I wouldn't be totally shocked that some of these very, very big companies are all of a sudden going to have financial problems. I mean, they've done quite well with being part of the system and part of the establishment and part of the deep state, but that doesn't guarantee anything. So something's going to happen. So all the smart people out there that know about it and the options, we will keep offering it, our program, the best way we can to make sure that our voices aren't silenced. And I think right now we've been able to skirt those who would like to silence us, but that is still in place now, and we have to deal with it. And that is, we have to get more and more people to understand what the First Amendment means when you have free speech. And it's been challenged. It's been known for hundreds of years, but right now there's a lot of people who don't have the biggest idea of what free speech actually means. Freely expressing yourself, you mean? And I keep thinking of it that to simplify it, I've always said the First Amendment was not there to allow us to talk about the weather, but it allowed us to say something controversial about our own government. And sometimes that is not honored and respected in our system today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.